working with one of your illustrious sons, Ashira Frankfurt, in the Caribbean region negotiating machinery. And since then, I have been working at the International Monetary Fund. I was in Ghana in 2006 to 9 as the IMF resident representative when Ghana discovered oil. So your activity here is very familiar to me, we went through very similar processes. As about a year ago, I am in charge of the IMF's work on Guyana. We work very closely with the Caribbean Center for Money and Finance on many Caribbean countries, and particularly here. What I would like to let me just make a couple of quick points. The finding of substantial amounts of natural resources, particularly petroleum, is potentially transformational for any country. The Ghanaians had the same experience, and many, many years before that, Trinidad and Tobago. These are probably two cases that are most familiar to you. The key, what have we learned in the last 50 or 60 years about these natural resource windfalls? A couple of things come to mind, and I will highlight those in a very short presentation. One is there's a difference between a low-income or middle-income country finding a natural resource windfall and a very wealthy country, say like Norway. Low-income countries, middle-income countries, have significant gaps or development needs to be addressed. Many of them in the social sector, for education, for health services, for transportation, for connectivity, infrastructure. So that finding a windfall you have to spend, or you should spend, to address your development needs. A lot of the benefit from the windfall centers around how efficiently you spend, and secondly, the transparency and accountability that you put in place for the society to feel comfortable and to have a confidence in the institutional arrangements for that spending. I'll elaborate on that. The third thing is I will point out, and this is by no means an exhaustive review of what the lessons are, but some of the key ones I would like to bring home in the presentation and for your consideration. The third thing is that you cannot forget the non-oil economy, the rest of the economy. A lot of the measures that will be implemented by governments, whoever they are, has to be ensured that you have inclusive, sustainable growth. Not growth simply driven only by the production of a natural resource. So, where does Guyana fit? I give you a very fancy title. Guyana's newfound oil wealth, enhancing economic growth and preserving stability. Okay. If you don't mind, I abandon your photo. When we look at Guyana, we say, okay, what is Guyana's current status in human development terms? We look at their life expectancy. The Caribbean average is somewhere about 74, Guyana is about 67, 68. The other, what we call emerging market developing economies, are somewhere around 71. So in terms of life expectancy, thank you very much. In terms of life expectancy, Guyana's indicators are below where your comparators where you would like to be, particularly if you benchmark against the Caribbean. When we look at infant mortality rates, again, Guyana is higher than where the Caribbean is and other potential emerging market developing countries. In what you call the human capital index, which goes to the qualities of education, your skills and so on, Guyana performs better, but there's still significant room for improvement. All this tells us is that Guyana's human development needs and health services have lacked the Caribbean region, and there is significant room for improvement. Therefore, your development needs are substantial and urgent. When we look at what has happened, after the great financial crisis in 2007-8, and the world economy went into a severe contraction, a lot of the Caribbean countries, whether you're producing tourism or producing commodities, adjusted to the impact of that crisis in terms of their fiscal accounts by cutting back on their public investment. And this is reflected here. If you look at Guyana's public investment, you would see sometime around 2011-12, it adopted a downward trend, and more recently it is beginning to show a slow movement upwards. This is important for Guyana because any assessment I have seen of Guyana points to two crucial facts. This is a very large country in Caribbean terms, very children in Caribbean. Most Caribbean countries are small islands, different levels of population from Jamaica, 3 million down to St. Kitts, about 46,000. A lot of Guyana's hinterland communities lack effective communication arrangements with the rest of the major cities and so on. So establishing a high quality road network and connectivity is an absolutely essential ingredient to producing stronger, more sustainable growth. So therefore, public investment needs to be a priority together with your education and health services going forward for you. And I would also add to that the strengthening of your institutions, which is the governance and so on. Then we go and say, well, okay, so far we know of LISA 1, which starts in early 2020. We know of LISA 2, which is supposed to come on stream in 2022. What we do in looking at these things is to look at the present value of your oil reserves. We put Guyana's known commercially viable oil reserves, I think at about 5 or 6 billion barrels. And therefore what we say is that if we stand in 2019 and we project forward over the life of these two fields, which is about 28 years, of these two oil fields. You have others, but let's just focus on the ones that we know about. But these two oil fields over the next 28 years, present value is you're trying to say, you're trying to discount those values. So because a purchasing power of $1 in 2019 is not the same thing as $1 in 2030. Okay? And then we say, okay, let us look at what the GDP is at the end of what GDP is in 2018. And then we say, given that calculation of present value, what percentage of your GDP, which is the value of your goods and services in 2018, are those oil reserves? And in that case, if you look at Guyana, you will see that in terms of the present value of oil reserves in percent of 2018 GDP, Guyana comes in around Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and some others there, more in line with the Emirates than with other larger producers. One of the things you have to bear in mind when we talk about Guyana and oil reserves and these kinds of estimates, this is a small population, 780,000 odd people. And a huge natural resource windfall across a very small population. One of the reasons that we see that Guyana's population growth has been like that is that over the last 25 years, Guyana has had the 6th highest rate of emigration in the Western Hemisphere. A lot of people have left. And we'll come back to talk a bit about how that's an impediment. When we say, okay, in terms of 2018 GDP, what is the gross, and based on our estimates of production for LISA 1 and LISA 2 over the life of the fields, what is the total oil revenue? Between 2020 to 25, the total oil revenue is about 780% of 2018 GDP. And over 2020 to 2048 is about 2,184% 2018 GDP. In the first 5 years, most of that goes to the company. They get about 676% of the GDP. And the Natural Resource Fund gets about 115, of which 54% of that 115% of GDP goes to your budget. The rest is in savings. But over the life of the project, the numbers are a lot different. The company gets 1,496, and I see their percent of the total GDP. The country gets 680 odd, and that amount goes to the. The first, in the production sharing arrangements that you have, they're fairly typical for many of the middle income and low income oil countries we see around the world. We looked at Timor-Leste, we looked at Mozambique, we looked at Angola, we looked at Ghana, all within the same kind of range. What we see is that over the entire life of this project, Guyana retains for itself about 33% of 2018 of the total share of the oil revenue. What they do in the first 5 to 7 years is allow the companies what they call cost recovery, allow the companies to recover the substantial costs of investment in exploration and initial oil development. If you look in cash flow terms, in terms of cash coming in, Guyana's share over the entire life of these projects in revenue is about 51%. But what happens is, after the first 5 or I think 7 years of the production sharing arrangement, the share that what they call profit oil, the share of profit oil goes up after the company's costs have been allowed to be essentially recovered, and Guyana's share of revenues jumps to about half of the oil revenues coming in. What this all means is that as of next year, and the first 5 years, even in the presence of that period of cost recovery, the amount of revenue coming from oil to the government budget is substantial. Now, what have you done so far? You would put in place a Natural Resource Fund Act, and we think this provides a very good framework for the management of your oil revenues. One of the things you want to do is, one of the challenges in putting in place these acts, and Madam, please tell me when I need to shut up. One of the things putting in place these acts is that you want to achieve transparency, you want simplicity so the population understands how this is being managed, and you want to ensure that while you're meeting your development needs, you're also saving a significant portion of these revenues for future generations of Guyanese to benefit from. And we think this act touches both of those bases. The revenues go to a natural resource fund, which is going to be held offshore of Guyana, what they call a sovereign wealth fund structure. All the Mediterranean countries, what they call the Gulf Oil Council countries, have this, and that natural resource fund is held offshore. So that's where Guyana's share of the petroleum revenues goes. And then you have a fiscal transfer rule, and you say every year that these revenues go in there, you have a rule that defines how much goes from that fund to your government budget, and then that has to be approved by your macroeconomic committee, similar to what many other countries call a fiscal council. A macroeconomic committee or fiscal council is composed of a variety of actors, state and non-state, government and opposition, and others, who to review what is being decided, what is being determined as the fiscally sustainable amount that is supposed to go to the budget, and then that goes to the budget. Now, when we look here at what happens in the first 4 years, you will see the transfer depends on production. In the first 4 years, according to your national revenue, NRF, if production is less than 200,000 barrels, you would see about 65% of what is coming in is transferred to the budget. And the production test tells you this is 100,000 barrels, 200,000 barrels, 300,000 barrels. So when it's about that, which is about 120,000 barrels, which is what Lisa 1 is, about 65% of that is going to the budget. The rest is staying in the NRF fund. Same thing in 2021. But in 2022, when Lisa 2 comes on and production jumps to over 200,000 barrels, then you notice that the transfer to the budget is smaller. That means because the share goes down, but the nominal amount is larger. Because the oil production goes from 120,000 barrels a day to something like 340,000 barrels a day. So the amount that you can commit to savings is much larger. And that you would see that going forward, that you would see that the transfer to the budget is there at about just below 45%, probably 50%, but most of it is going to your savings. So we ask ourselves, given that good start and that architecture, what else is needed? We say, well, okay, if this country has to spend money on its infrastructure and social development needs, how fast should it spend and how much should it spend? And and this is only the IMF view, you're entitled to have a completely different view of it. What we see is that what all oil countries try to do in their government accounts is to look at what is the non-oil fiscal balance. In other words, what is the government's balance at the end of every fiscal year, excluding oil revenues. And what we see is that in 2019, the government fiscal deficit is around 5% of your GDP, which is within the ballpark of lower middle income and lower income countries. Lower income and lower middle income countries tend to have a larger fiscal deficit because you have more pressing social needs than other kinds of countries. And what we suggest is you want to preserve both the substantial savings of this, but you also want to be able to spend to meet these needs. And the big challenge for you, as any other countries, is not to get the Dutch disease type effects. In other words, if you spend too much, too fast in public investment, for example, if you start building a series of roads and other kinds of construction activity very quickly, okay, you can find that supply, your ability to supply those sectors that are growing, you may not be able to supply them as quickly and as competitively priced, and inflation takes off. So inflation can move from 5-6% to almost 20%. We saw that in Trinidad in the mid-1970s. In the mid-1970s in Trinidad, when the government got their big windfall of oil and so on after OPEC, wage increases 121% to security officers, 117% to teachers, massive wage increases, a huge amount of spending took place. Inflation in Trinidad took off and went up to 20-something%. So that you're getting more money, but the cost of living is rising very, very fast. So that's why this balance is so critical. And therefore what we see is Guyana could move, what is the ability of Guyana to absorb additional spending without producing these very negative effects. And what we see is, if we allow, this is the non-oil fiscal balance, if we allow the non-oil fiscal balance from 2020 at around 5% to deteriorate from about 5% in 2020 to about 8% of GDP in 2024, Guyana then has about an additional 2% of GDP in spending that it can do on public investment and about 1% of GDP in current spending, purely through oil revenue. And what we said is, one of the things that you don't want to do as an oil country or a big natural resource sector is you don't want to be spending more out of your commodity revenues and building debt at the same time. You don't want to do that. You really don't want to do that. But your oil find is significant enough that you can allow this deterioration, and at the same time, if you look at your overall fiscal balance, including oil revenues, you can run a balanced budget. Because what you would do is that the non-oil fiscal deficit must be equal to the amount of money that's coming from the Natural Resource Fund every year. And that allows you your non-oil deficit to deteriorate from 5 to 8, totally financed out of the inflows from the Natural Resource Fund, and therefore your overall balance in 2022 is 0. So it will take you 2 years to get there. But what this table doesn't show, unfortunately, is that by 2024, your debt would drop from 58% of GDP to about 21%. One of the reasons is that your GDP is going to grow a hell of a lot. In 2024, oil as a share of your total GDP will be 40%. 40% of your GDP will be oil. So if I'm standing here to you in October 2019, in 2024, I'm standing here, 40% of your GDP has been added to your GDP. So your GDP has grown substantially, so your debt is coming down. A lot of the Gulf and Council countries like this, like yours, they eventually drag their debt to 0. Many of them have no debt at all. And one of the reasons that you want to have that kind of scenario is because one of the things we know about oil prices is that they are very volatile. Oil can be 60 today, it can be 90 tomorrow, it can be 50 the next day. So you want to put your country in a position that while you are meeting your spending needs and doing these things, that oil prices bounce around, you have enough buffer that you can mitigate that so you don't have to arrest and stop your spending. Finally, what are the benefits from this? And I'll go through quickly because I don't want to go on more. We said, okay, if you get to this balanced budget in 2 years, from 2020 to 2022, or if you decided, you know what, I want to be a little bit more aggressive than that. So I'm going to give myself 7 years to get to the balanced budget because Guyanese need us to spend money now, and plenty of it. What happens? So if you look at here, this is if you do it in 2 years, and if you do it in 7 years, you would see that the public investment you undertake between 2020 and 2022 is much lower than if you do this. Right? So in other words, if you're going to build 2 roads, you're building 5. If you're going to build 3 schools, you're taking on a hell of a lot more. Well, what does that mean for the rest of the economy? It means, first of all, that if you have, in the aggressive scenario, which is this way, you're spending a lot more in public investment, you would see that under this scenario, first of all, let me go here. Under this scenario, over time, private investment looks sharper, but then it turns down very sharp because government investment crowds out private investment. One of the simple reasons. If the government is doing all these things, it's buying up all the labor. Who's going to have this? Where's this labor going to come from? And let me point out, we think this is the biggest problem Guyana has. You have very small levels of skill and semi-skilled labor. So it's one thing to say, go spend a lot of money, where you get people from. Right? You're going to need a lot of people to achieve the development needs that you have. And then we say also, if we look at the non-resource output, the non-oil economy, what is happening there? Well, under the non-oil economy, at first you get a big bump, but then a very sharp decline. Again, because oil is booming and oil is financing public investment, all the resources in the country are dragged that way, reallocated that way, and the rest of the economy struggles. So the benefit of having a fiscal framework is that it allows you to meet your development needs in a measured way, not overnight, as you can say in the Caribbean, but at the same time, it doesn't seriously disadvantage the rest of the economy, and also doesn't put the households in a position where they're dealing with very high rates of inflation. Looks like I'm still. Okay. Finally, let me finish off quickly. All of this presumes other things. One is public financial management. Government's systems for spending money have to be stronger, starting with public procurement. Your tenders board has to be a very strong institution, or stronger institution, that has the capacity to review bids when government puts out for tender. The reporting of those bids and the investment choice has to be evidence-based. It has to be transparent to all of you. Why did government choose this contract over that contract? That is key. Then transparency and governance. You have had an Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative in Guyana. This is an initiative that is in place so that for the transparent management of resources, of natural resources, you've had a report. That report says you need to do certain things. That needs to get implemented. Very important, your anti-corruption frameworks. Your asset declaration regime, you have one in place. People need to declare their assets. You have an integrity commission that is looking after that. When you meet with the integrity commission, one of their challenges, they don't have enough accountants to go through people's finances. They don't have enough legal expertise. So you need these institutions that you have set up to look after governance and corruption. The biggest problem that they have is getting the skills of people they need to discharge their mandate. Then you look also at institutional capacity. To get those skills, as we discussed, you have to put many people more through your education system. So you have to be able to not only produce more people, but to a higher standard. One of the things we see is that in Guyana, the quality of education, although you spend as much per head as your CARICOM neighbors, your results are weaker, and that means your quality is not as strong. Your teachers need development, your schools need better, and I think these are all things that Guyana is no idea need to tell. So institutional capacity is critical, and then you also have to, we can address economic diversification. But let me just end with this here. The key to your ability to meet your needs and do your things is going to be your ability to access skilled labor. And therefore, just like many of the Gulf Council countries, in the first many years of this oil find that you have, to be able to meet society's needs for development, you're going to have a relatively open labor market. Open labor market, especially the CARICOM. Because you can, if you decide to not do that, you will find that the price of your labor, and one day a guy is working at $50 as a carpenter, the next day he's working at $100, the following day he's working at $150, because everybody's bidding for the same small pool of people. Thank you, Professor Mann. Sorry I went on so long.
So thank you for staying on time. We've asked everybody to speak for 15 to 20 minutes, so you were spot on. Any questions on this presentation? We can take a few. Don't be shy. Going once. files. There you go. Chairman Oricon, could you, do we have a roving mic in the room? No? If not, I'm sorry, I have to ask you to come up here. Thank you. Please say who you are so everybody knows.
Thank you very much, Doug. My name is Brian Arnold, Chairman of Region Number 9, and thank you so much for that presentation. Well, I was looking at, you said that you could allow to go down to 8% GDP. If we don't allow that, what would happen?
Good question. If you go for a lower balance, say you decide I don't want 8, I want 6, or some other number, it means that you, well, first of all, if you feel that going to 8, that level of spending, that going from 5 to 8, is too fast for you. It's going to produce these distortions. In your macroeconomic committee, if you sit down and look at it and say, no, I don't care what these other people say. If we do this, this will produce these negative things from Guyana. Please don't do 8. 8 is not an act of God. It's just a suggestion. Okay? But at the end of the day, the key message is here. Have a target that allows you to address the legitimate needs of your population, because with this oil find, your population is expectant. People in Guyana have very real needs to be met, particularly in your hinterland communities, and that, as you know better than I do. They are going to be very expectant that the leadership of the country, you, and your parliament and so on, deliver to them these benefits, because Guyana, as a lower middle income country, has real needs. So there's nothing sacrosanct about the 8%, but it's important that you have a target, and that target does not allow you to have these negative things. And also you will know debt. Let me tell you, there are going to be lots of people arriving from all parts of the world that are going to show up in Guyana offering you all kinds of reasons to borrow money, to build all kinds of things, from airports to 5-lane highways to all kinds of things. You, in your due diligence, have to make sure you don't waste money on these things.